I was sleeping on the couch where I would usually sleep, and I woke up to him. I just opened my eyes, I woke up, and he was sexually assaulting me. Why don't you think of the worst stuff that someone could do to somebody as a sexual assault? And that'll answer your question.
And one of the few people Drake Bell has opened up to about his ordeal when he was a Nickelodeon star is journalist Kate Taylor. Quiet on Set is rooted in her reporting on Nickelodeon for Business Insider, first publishing a piece on the kids' TV channel back in 2022. Kate, also an executive producer for Quiet on Set, and she joins us now. Kate, thanks so much for making the time tonight.
Thank you so much for having me.
I do want to start with Dan Schneider's recent apology, responding to some of the allegations in a 20-minute video with one of his former actors. Let's listen to a part of that.
All right. When I watched the show, I could see the hurt in some people's eyes, and it made me feel awful and regretful and sorry.
I know you've been tracking this for years now. There have been these allegations about Schneider for years, and your investigation into his actions on set was published almost 2 years ago at this point. He has never addressed the claims until now. What is your reaction to Schneider's response?
I think that it's really fascinating that it took an entire docuseries to have him respond to these allegations, some of which have been going around online for years, and many of which I covered in my 2022 investigation in Business Insider. At that time, Dan Schneider himself did not offer any comment or statement on the record. So I think it is interesting that he's chosen to speak out now, and that the way he spoke out was kind of in a bit of a controlled environment in an interview that was published on his own YouTube channel. Quiet on Set offered him an opportunity for us to interview him, and he was not interested in that at that time.
But I want to move to Drake Bell, because you are one of the only people he has spoken to about his story that is featured in the docuseries. And there's a particularly heartbreaking moment where his father is trying to tell production about his concerns with Brian Peck. Those concerns were dismissed at the time. In your opinion, did Nickelodeon do enough to protect Drake Bell both before and after he was sexually abused?
I think that that's something that Drake himself has really grappled with, and I've continued to grapple with in my reporting. I think that Drake probably said it best, where he told me even doing something small, such as offering therapy after his abuser was arrested, that could have done a lot. And while not everyone at Nickelodeon necessarily knew the play-by-play at what Drake had kind of survived here, we know that some people knew, Dan Schneider, for example, knew, and we knew that he was struggling on set. So I believe that it makes sense for employers of minors should be paying attention and should be thinking about how can we support child stars better. And I do think Nickelodeon should have done more for him.
It's another shocking moment in the series, the discovery of just how many celebrities supported Brian Peck after sexually abusing Bell. And among them, James Marsden, SNL's Taran Killam, Alan Thicke from Growing Pains, Boy Meets World star Ryder Strong, Will Friedle, all writing letters to the court. And these letters were sealed until last year. Tell us more about them.
Yes, Maxine Productions, who was kind of the documentary team who was doing a lot of the heavy lifting in reporting this, they actually petitioned the court to unseal these letters. So after years and years of these names being sealed away, we had access to them for the first time. And they really underscored how difficult it was for Drake to get support in the industry, where he really felt isolated, and that everyone had kind of taken Brian's side in the aftermath, where he saw these really powerful people back Brian. And for him, I think he realized, okay, I can't go public with this because these really powerful actors and producers are publicly supporting this person. What happens if my name is out here as the person who was abused?
There was also a gender discrimination lawsuit filed against Schneider's production company, the only 2 women writers on The Amanda Show, alleging that they were forced to split a single salary for their work. Now, that suit was settled, but this was one of Schneider's first shows. Was this an early red flag? How was he able to continue at Nickelodeon after this?
To me, I found it very surprising that someone could deal with a lawsuit kind of after the first season of their first show that they created and go on to build an empire at the same network. I found that to be very surprising when I first kind of discovered this occurrence. And I think that that's something that speaks to who is able to pursue certain careers in Hollywood and whose mistakes are forgiven and who gets forced out. And we saw the woman who filed the lawsuit, she ended up kind of ending her career in children's entertainment altogether after that.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.